Meet the man who created Nightmare on Elm Street. He wasn't just a horror filmmaker. He was a paradox. A man who came from strict religion and gentle manners, yet somehow became one of the architects of modern nightmares.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
1. The Preacher's Kid. Wesley Earl Craven was born August 2nd, 1939, in Cleveland, Ohio, into a strict Baptist household. Movies, dancing, and even comic books were considered sinful. He didn't see his first film until he was almost in college. So picture that, the future creator of A Nightmare on Elm Street, a man who would traumatize a generation with dreams and demons, grew up not even allowed to step foot in a movie theater. He said the first movie he ever saw was To Kill a Mockingbird, 1962, and it blew his mind. He realized that film could make people feel something deeply: fear, sympathy, tension, without preaching at them. The college professor turned horror director, Craven earned a degree in English and psychology, and then a master's in philosophy and writing from Johns Hopkins University. He went on to become a college professor teaching humanities and literature. He was, by all accounts, soft-spoken, thoughtful, and academic, nothing like the horror villains he'd later invent. But there was always a curiosity lurking in him about the darkness of the human mind. What makes people violent, afraid, or cruel? One of his early fascinations was with dream theory. Freud, Jung, the idea that dreams are where our deepest fears manifest. That concept would later become the foundation of A Nightmare on Elm Street. His secret double life. Here's where it gets interesting. While he was teaching college, Craven quietly started working behind the scenes on low-budget films, but not the kind you'd brag about. In the late 1960s, he worked in New York's underground film scene, editing and occasionally shooting softcore porn films under fake names to make money and learn the ropes of filmmaking.
Get undressed, Angela, quickly.
He later said he didn't regret it. It was his film school. But it gave him an odd sense of duality, a mild-mannered intellectual by day, learning the gritty, transgressive side of film by night. That tension, polite surface, dark undercurrent, became the hallmark of his stories. His first horror film, The Last House on the Left, 1972, was made for just $87,000, a brutal, shocking revenge film inspired by Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring. It wasn't supernatural, but it showed Craven's fascination with how ordinary people can become monsters when pushed. He said, "I wanted to show that the real horror isn't in ghosts or demons, it's in what people are capable of." The movie was so disturbing that some theaters refused to show it, but it became an underground sensation, a raw, emotional, almost too real look at violence. You can see echoes of this realism in how Elm Street blurs reality and nightmare. It feels grounded even when it's surreal. Freddy Krueger was a man who lived in the town of Springwood, Ohio. He was known as the Springwood Slasher, a sadistic child murderer who preyed on local children. When the police finally caught him, a technical error in the legal process caused him to go free. Enraged and desperate for justice, the parents of Springwood took matters into their own hands. They cornered Freddy in the boiler room where he worked, poured gasoline around it, and burned him alive. Years later, Freddy's name is rarely spoken, but his spirit hasn't died. Instead, he finds a new way to get revenge by invading the dreams of the parents' children. Teenagers in Springwood start having the same nightmare. A burned man wearing a dirty red and green sweater and a glove with knives for fingers stalking them in dark, twisted dreamscapes. One by one, they realize the truth. If Freddy kills you in your dream, you die for real. When Tina Gray is murdered in her sleep, her friend Nancy Thompson begins to investigate. She learns about Freddy's past and uncovers the secret her parents have kept hidden. Determined to stop him, Nancy fights to stay awake, using caffeine and sheer willpower, and eventually decides to bring Freddy out of her dream to confront him in the real world. The film ends in a haunting blur between dream and reality, leaving viewers unsure whether Freddy is truly gone or still waiting in the next nightmare. A Nightmare on Elm Street had several eerie and very real inspirations, and when you piece them together, it makes the movie feel way darker and more tragic than most people realize. The real events, people, and ideas that gave birth to Freddy Krueger and the nightmare world Wes Craven created. The real-life deaths that started it all. In the early 1980s, Wes Craven came across a series of news stories from the Los Angeles Times that chilled him to the bone. Families who had fled the Khmer Rouge genocide in Cambodia, survivors of unspeakable horrors, were reporting something bizarre. Their healthy teenage sons were dying in their sleep. These weren't random heart attacks. The pattern was hauntingly specific. They'd tell their parents, "I can't sleep. There's something waiting for me in my dreams." Then, when they finally fell asleep, they'd begin screaming and never wake up again. Doctors were baffled. Autopsies showed no heart defects, no poison, no clear cause of death. The CDC eventually labeled it Asian death syndrome, now called sudden unexpected nocturnal death syndrome, SUNS. A real but still mysterious condition that disproportionately affected young Southeast Asian men, especially refugees from the Khmer Rouge era. Craven later said one story in particular stuck with him. A boy had nightmares for days, insisting he was being chased by something in his sleep. His parents gave him sleeping pills, desperate to help. He refused to take them. He stayed awake for almost a week. Finally, exhausted, he fell asleep in front of the TV. In the middle of the night, his parents heard him screaming. By the time they reached him, he was dead. When they looked through his room, they found the pills hidden under his bed and a small coffee maker. He'd been trying to stay awake. Craven said, "It was such a dramatic story. A child having a vision of something that was chasing him, something that he knew would get him if he slept, and then he dies in the middle of a nightmare. It was terrifying." That was the seed of A Nightmare on Elm Street. The shadows of the Khmer Rouge. Between 1975 and 1979, the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia was responsible for the genocide of nearly 2 million people. Survivors who fled to America often carried severe trauma, survivor's guilt, and spiritual beliefs about restless spirits, vengeful ghosts, and curses. In Cambodian folklore, there's a spirit called the Arp, or Ap, a female ghost that detaches her head, hunts at night. Others spoke of spirits of the wrongfully killed that haunt the living through dreams. Some researchers and spiritual leaders suggested that these refugees believed the spirits of the dead, those who died unjustly under the Khmer Rouge, were still seeking vengeance, and that their nightmares were not just trauma, but hauntings. Wes Craven, a lifelong skeptic but fascinated by myths and psychology, was struck by the overlap. Here were people literally dying in their dreams, from both psychological and perhaps spiritual wounds of a genocide. He once said, open quote, "It seemed to me these young men were dying from old world fears they'd brought into a new world." Close quote. That concept, that evil can cross from dreams into reality, became the foundation of Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger's real-world roots. The name and look of Freddy also came from real memories and real fears. The name, Fred Krueger, was actually the name of a childhood bully who tormented Wes Craven when he was young. The hat and sweater. Craven said he based Freddy's hat on one worn by a man he saw peering into his window one night when he was a boy, a tall, dirty, homeless-looking man who just stood there and stared back at him, not saying a word. He said it was the single most terrifying moment of his childhood, and that he never forgot that face. The sweater colors, red and green. Craven discovered in a science article that red and green are the two colors most difficult for the human eye to see side by side, so he used that combination to make Freddy visually uncomfortable to look at. The bladed glove. He wanted a weapon that felt animalistic but human. Something primitive. Claws, but man-made. He said he wanted Freddy to represent the return of something ancient, a predator who could stalk you where you're supposed to be safe, in your dreams. When you rewatch A Nightmare on Elm Street knowing all this, you start to see the real tragedy hidden under the slasher surface. The teenagers can't sleep, like the Cambodian boys who feared their dreams. The parents don't believe them, like the refugee families who tried to dismiss the nightmares as just trauma. And Freddy himself, a burned ghost who returns through dreams, echoes those stories of vengeful spirits that refuse to die. Nancy even rigs coffee pots in her room and tries to stay awake, just like the real boy from the LA Times article who died trying to do the same thing. And when she screams herself awake, covered in sweat, unsure if she's dreaming or not, it mirrors the blurred line between trauma and reality that haunted those survivors. When the movie came out in 1984, people thought it was pure fantasy, But for some communities, especially Southeast Asian refugees, it felt disturbingly familiar. There were even reports, mostly anecdotal, of older Cambodians warning their children not to watch it, that it could wake up the bad dreams again. Craven, when asked later, said, "People think Freddy came from imagination, but he came from something real, something that killed real people." Craven's imagination often came from personal fear. He talked about a recurring childhood nightmare that terrified him. "I'd be walking down a dark street at night, and there was always this man following me. His face was burnt, his hat pulled low, and no matter where I ran, he was just there." Close quote. Years later, he told interviewers that the man at the window, the one he actually saw staring up at him as a child, became the face of Freddy Krueger. That wasn't just artistic, it was autobiographical. He said the real man stared at him for several seconds before finally walking away, slowly, deliberately. And young Wes felt paralyzed. He said, "That look, I've never forgotten it. It was pure evil, not supernatural, just human evil. That's what stuck with me. That feeling that evil could be real, could stand on your street and look at you through the window, became the seed of all his future monsters. The making of Freddy, a psychological patchwork. Freddy Krueger wasn't just a killer in a hat. He was, in a way, a collage of everything that haunted Craven. The real-life genocide stories from Cambodia, his childhood fear of a stranger's face in the dark, the cruelty of bullies and abusive authority figures, and the strict religious warnings about evil and punishment he heard growing up. Freddy was the devil from his childhood church, the bully from his school, and the man at the window, all stitched together into one figure who punished both kids and parents. He once said, "Freddy isn't the devil. He's what happens when you bury evil and pretend it's gone." The scholar of fear. What made Craven different from most horror directors was that he never saw himself as one. He saw himself as a philosopher exploring fear. He read psychology journals, studied myth and religion, and wrote detailed notes about the function of horror, how it acts like a dream we all share, helping us confront what we can't talk about. That's why Elm Street, Scream, and The People Under the Stairs all have layers. Social commentary hiding inside the scares. He wasn't trying to make slasher movies. He was trying to make modern myths. His quiet death and final irony. Wes Craven died peacefully in 2015 from brain cancer at age 76. Fans found it strangely poetic. The man who gave us nightmares passed away in his sleep. That's it for today's video. If you're still watching, you're one of the brave ones. Subscribe for more chilling stories, smash that like button, and I'll catch you in the next one.